Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Eric Noel. I'm the Director of Pilot Development at AeroGuard Flight Training Center. I want to welcome everybody to our U.S. Airline Pilot Job Demand webinar. We try to focus on kind of the career and sort of be education experts, not just in the flight training space, but sort of in how to help you align with your career goals as well. And I'm fortunate enough today to be with Mr. Kit Darby. He's going to be our primary presenter. He is a wealth of knowledge and experience. He comes from many years, nearly 30 years of time at the airlines, over 20,000 of flight hours, with a lot of that also being in the U.S. Army as well. And honestly, I think in addition to all of the flying bit, really has a passion for kind of career development and market analysis. And I think especially now, more than ever, he's a wealth of knowledge, and I'm really honored to be able to hear what he has to say today, and looking forward to everything he has to offer. So, Mr. Darby, I'll hand the reins over to you, sir, and you can take it away.
All right, good afternoon. So thank you for the opportunity, and hope that we'll generate some questions along the way. I encourage you to send your questions in as I talk, and Eric will feed them to us when we're finished to build the space. And it doesn't have to be just on what we're asking or talking about today. If you have questions in this area, I always joke that my marriage counseling is not too good, but the rest of it, I've probably seen it before. I frequently hear this is a unique situation, and yet with as much time as I've spent doing it, I've frequently heard it before, and consequently have worked out a solution or approach to it to help you through the problem. So I'm going to share my screen here initially. We have a slide presentation, and you confirm that you've got it, Eric, that you've got a screen, because mine's a little different on this end. Okay.
Yep,
so
I see it.
So we're looking at a situation today that is very volatile, and I'm going to introduce myself a little bit, but I want you to realize that it's a changing market, and we need to be adaptive as airline pilots in the job. We need to be adaptive as students coming up. So to start with, let me get this going. I currently teach in the ATP CTP program for Delta on a number of different airplanes. I taught for Boeing on the 717 for 7 years, and now I teach the ATP CTP program in several different airplanes at Delta. The 717 is one of my favorite, typical 6-glass screen setup, wonderfully automated airplane. One of its unique features is it will auto land on a single engine, auto land and go around on a single engine, which almost no other airliner will do. This is my military airplane. She's ugly, but she sure can cook. So she's a turboprop, 387.65 speed limit, takeoff in about 600 or 700 feet and land in 350 feet. About all the fun you're allowed to have in the Army. So as a military pilot, though, Army is typically what we call statistically insignificant. When you chart the number of Army pilots in the airlines today, the number is pretty small, less than 1%. But that's going to change because we have a lot of rotary wing to fixed wing transitions going on. They're being hired by regional airlines, and they will show up at the airlines after they gain the qualifications and experience to make that transition. So that's going to change. This is the inside of the airplane. It's a ejection seat, STOL, aerobatic, single pilot. Like I said, all the fun you're allowed to have in the Army, and there is a limit to how much fun you can have in the Army. So that's what it looks like. This is the male version of it. That's a side-looking airborne radar. A lot of fun. So my own background, you already mentioned a ton of flight time as an airline pilot, 7,000 hours teaching in simulators after I retired. I was one of those unfortunate ones that had to retire at 60, right before it changed. 6 months later, it was 65. I run an information service, kitdarby.com, aviation consulting. My main business is expert witness, where I build models for pilots that are delayed, injured, killed, whatever, and predict their pay and benefits, retirement for legal suits. And I do quite a bit of that. I'm actually pretty busy with it. And consequently, I'm in the contracts and building career values all the time. So I have a lot of experience and a lot of information about what the career is worth. And I mention that because everybody sort of knows airline pilots make a pretty good living. And then they don't really know much after that. In fact, the working pilot knows he has a pretty good deal, but he doesn't probably understand the value of his benefits or particularly his retirement overall. So we'll try to talk about that a little bit at the end of the show. Military instructor pilot, 23 years. In my 8 years of active, I got 4,400 hours, which averages out to 56 hours a month. As you know, the average military pilot gets 20 or 30 hours a month. So I was very, very active instructor in all the active Army airplanes, and flying as an instructor, had about 2,200 hours of instructor time in the 4,400 hours. So teaching for Delta, we said that. And the information services I've run over the years, I was a partner in FAPA, FAPA, Future Airline Pilots at the time, and then Kit Darby, Air Inc. in the middle, and then kitdarby.com. And in those three companies, we've had about 200,000 pilots trying to reach the major airlines for the most part. And they've tried a lot of things. Some things work really well. Some things didn't work at all. What we're going to try to do is give some guidance on what might work and how you want to run your job search. The purpose being to get you where you want to go as quickly as possible, because it is a seniority-based business, meaning that if you get hired before the other guy, regardless of your qualifications, experience, or background, that you will be promoted before he is, fly a bigger airplane, have holidays or weekends off before he does. So everything is seniority-based. How much money you make, when you work, and when you don't work. So it's a very important factor. Our job would be to get you hired as quickly as possible to take advantage of whatever seniority you can gain. It also protects you from furlough. We have an up and down business, and there are furloughs at the bottom. If you get 5 or 10% of the seniority list behind you, you will likely not be furloughed. So it could be job protection to go around with it. So 5 airlines. I started out at Braniff. They failed. I went to Capital. They failed. I was a DC-8 captain there for a short time. Went to Republic, and at that point decided I should look around, because there was the manager of the company had a history of mergers, and we weren't sure who they were going to merge with. Had I known it was going to be Northwest, I might have stuck around, but I didn't know. So I went to work on another round of applications. Overall, I've applied about, gotten interviewed with about 30 companies, and I've worked for 5. I got hired by Piedmont, which was a good company from my point of view. I'm a North Carolina boy. You can probably tell by my deep Southern accent. And I thought that was going to be good. I was already working at Capital. I applied to other companies, also got hired by United, and I did an analysis. This is sort of the power of information, if you will. Piedmont had about 2,200 pilots, and all but 500 of them were younger than I am. So in a seniority-based business, the only way to pass somebody is for them to retire, and they weren't going to retire. So at United, they had about 5,000 pilots, and only about 500 were younger than I am. And I retired at United, number 500, as a 767 captain for that company. So my forecast proved true, and my decision was a good one. I was never furloughed at United, was promoted to captain in about 6 years, could have made it in 3 or 4 if I was willing to be fly a smaller plane and be in a junior city, but I wasn't. And then, of course, I eventually worked for Boeing and Delta after retirement as a sim instructor, ground school instructor. So we're looking at today's market, hiring trends, factors that drive the hiring. We're looking at the job search planning, the things you need to do to be a good candidate, and perhaps the career values to motivate you that not only if you love flying is it a great job, but it also has big rewards. We'll also look at applications and cover letters just briefly. I spend a lot of my time reviewing electronic applications, and I have to tell you that pilots aren't very good at it. The questions are not well designed. The information that's displayed on the application is not the same way you put it in the database, and consequently, you don't get credit for your qualifications and experience as you should. So I can't change your life, but I can change the way we present your life. It's perhaps not critical at the regional airline level. It is critical at the major airline level where the market is still competitive. Cover letters and resumes. Yes, you still need cover letters and resumes in the electronic age. Most airlines provide the ability to attach your resume and perhaps your resume and cover letter to your application. So you'll use it in the application, you'll use it in the interview. So you still need one. You might also use it to give it to a buddy to recommend you, because these recommendations are very important. About 80% of the people hired are recommended. 15% are minorities. 5% would be non-recommended, non-minority candidate. So the recommendation becomes key at getting you into this business at the major airline level, at the higher level. It doesn't hurt anywhere, but it could be essential at the major airline level. So over the years, I worked at FAPA and then at Air Inc. This is an Air Inc. binder. We produced about 5,000 pages a year of information, newsletter on who's hiring, address and information directory, salary survey, magazines, all that stuff. About 80% of the people hired during that period were members of that company, and the other 20% probably read somebody else's copy. So application reviews, like I said, the applications are key at getting your score for you in an application screening system that produces an interview. So this is your first impression, basically. First impression that you get a score high enough to be interviewed, and your first impression in the interview, because they print this out and your interviewer looks at it for not a whole lot of time, but some time before you get there. And that is your first impression. When you walk in, they already have formed some opinion about how you stack up, and then they're going to hopefully have you live up to what is a great application. So up-to-date information, develop as a candidate, typical career values, and recruiting is what we're working on. So I do some forecasting. When this first happened, after living through 9/11 and looking at the big recession in 08, we had a whole bunch of examples of what had happened before. And this sort of laid out what might happen with no information, no idea how bad it was going to get, and no idea how fast it was going to recover. We made this forecast based on previous problems, up and downs in the industry, as to what it might look like. And it looked like it could be anywhere from a 1 year to a 3 or 4 year recovery. So then this is the most recent version of that. The black line and the red line are actual data. So it got worse than we thought it could be, down to 90, 95% reduction. And then it made a better recovery, faster than we thought it could. And now with the resurgence of the latest variant of the virus, it's sort of leveled off. It's actually gone down a little bit, but that appears to be peaking, and it looks like we're going to recover. And from a perspective around the world, the US recovered dramatically faster than almost any other region. So we're doing really well. And that's important because it's a world market. If we do well and others don't, we're in a position to take advantage. It's sort of the old joke that, a war is not a bad thing if you have most of the guns and bullets. Well, our airlines are doing very well. They're going to be profitable again, and we're going to be in a position to dominate markets around the world. So you turn this into pilots, and this was my initial look without any information about how the pilot recovery might look, and then the current one, and what we were bolstered tremendously by the CARES Act. So the top bar there, CARES 1, 2, and 3, basically saved our industry what could have been 10 or 15,000 furloughed pilots. And then, of course, the vaccine mandate and the vaccines helped us overcome to an extent, although we don't have full participation. So on the bottom, I had drawn that the hiring would begin somewhere earlier than reaching the full RPM level, because we furloughed all these pilots, 5,000 early furloughs. That's a year or two worth of hiring. And we had hour reduction for a few pilots that were flying less than a full schedule. And that caused us to need pilots much sooner than the general recovery, which would occur at the end of 22 in my chart. And I had hiring starting in the middle of 21, and that's pretty close to what happened. We had a whole bunch of people getting hired, and now by the end of 21, almost everybody was hiring, and it's going to get even better. This year is going to be an incredible year. The previous maximum number of pilots hired in a single year, a couple of times we came right at 5,000. Last year, a half a year, the last year is a half a year, was about 5,000. And this coming year looks like it could be 8, 9, even 10,000. and that is twice the number of pilots ever hired. There's some discussion about whether the airlines can actually hire and train that many pilots, but they are doing it. They've been hiring large numbers of pilots, 50, 65 a week at an airline. You multiply that times 52 weeks and you see the training level that they've been able to achieve. It's amazing. More pilots hired and trained than ever before. So we sort of have two recoveries going on. The first of all, the cargo, it took a hit. Cargo's on the right side, but it recovered very quickly. The green line would be the revenue part of that. The other one is the available. So we have a very high load factor in cargo. And then we have the passenger side, which is doing a little better. This only goes to April of 21, but we had a very different recovery for passengers. Cargo got better quick, passengers getting better more slowly. This is a sort of a hiring over the years. And as we said, it's up and down at 5,000 a couple of times in 2000, back again, 17, 18, and again in last year in 21. And it's going to be twice that. I'd have to make a new chart. It'd go right off the chart for 2022. So what's it based on? So the economic recovery and return to profitability, that's happening. Airlines are starting to show reduced losses and a few small profits. The hirings return. We always had FedEx, UPS, Atlas, Frontier, Allegiant, Spirit came back early. Opportunities in cargo, corporate charter, corporate aviation is typical when the airlines are hiring, lose a lot of pilots. So if you're in the corporate charter or fractional area, everybody's hiring. The inventory of used airplanes is gone. A lot of people decided they didn't want to get on an airliner in a crowded situation during the pandemic. And it looks like that's going to hold up, at least it's continuing for now. The other thing that did well, of course, if you were a military pilot or working a government contract, they pretty much weren't affected by COVID. So they have made they were continued to hire. Domestic recovery first. So since the US is doing better, our US companies that have domestic markets are doing well. Companies that are primarily domestic like Southwest or the other companies, typically smaller major airlines are doing very well. They're well positioned. They have a simple fleet, meaning that they don't have a lot of different airplane types like Southwest. So when you bring somebody back, they can fly any airplane. Contrast that to Delta, United, American. They reduce the staff, and big airline pilots have to be trained to fly smaller airplanes, and the smaller airplane pilots get furloughed, and then they come back and you have to do the training in reverse, and it's a huge amount of training. So a simple fleet, people that go to pleasure destinations. So a lot of people now work from home. They're able to travel to pleasure destinations. And the most difficult to come back is international. And we don't totally control that. We have to realize that if you have to live by the rules of the country you're going to, and some of those are locked down or require a 2-week quarantine when you get there, require tests and vaccination, things people may not be willing to do. So this is a tough environment, and it's going to come back much more slowly. The good news is the domestic part's back in some cases over 100%, and the internationally it's down. It's about a third of what it used to be. Domestically, it's closer to a half to 2/3, depending on the company. And business travel coming back slowly, affected again by the rise in the virus, and that's going to slow it. But people, of course, are learning to work from wherever they're at, and that's making the pleasure destinations and other places to live other than big cities go to work 9 to 5. That's softening and may not be required for a full business recovery. So forecast over the years been pretty accurate. Come out very close. Last year we had 5,000 at the majors. Double what I forecast. The recovery happened in the middle of the year, and I thought we'd get a half a year's worth, but we got a full year's worth in that half a year. So we're hiring at twice the rate. 9,000 in 2022 possible, certainly a new record. Hiring tied to growth and profits. The full economic recovery is what we need. There's no doubt that airline hiring in the long term is determined by our success in the marketplace. In the short term, we're trying to make up for those 5,000 pilots we retired early. Looking back on that, the airlines probably wish that some of those guys were still available. So 1 to 2 years away on the full recovery, but the hiring is here now. Pilot hiring early and age 65 retirements created a big demand, and that's causing the hiring that we're seeing today. So factors that drive the hiring, this is a long-term forecast, a general upward worldwide aircraft history, and it goes up and down a little bit with the economy, but not too much. This is an older chart, but it's the best one I've ever seen that shows the relationship between the percentage of passengers and the real GDP. So we are directly tied to the success of our economy, which has now become a world economy. So even though we're doing very well, we are somewhat subject to the fate of the world, because certainly our international travel is in that basket. So we're also subject to oil prices. So there's an inverse relationship between the cost of oil and success at the airline. And that you can certainly see that here. So when fuel prices are low, airlines are very profitable. When prices are high, they're less profitable. They typically take that profit and put it into additional airplanes, routes, or allowed to grow by being profitable. Long term, it's about half growth and half retirement over long term. Right now, we're having a lot of retirements due to hiring bulges in the past. It's another look at the up and down relationship. The airline's historical operating profits cycle every 7 to 10 years. I might add that when COVID hit, we were on year 11, so we were well past the time for a downturn. We haven't had a pandemic before, not one that had a major effect in the US. So it's one of those new variables that we have to deal with. So we make a pilot forecast looking at these variables. It's based on the number of aircraft per airplane. You can see the non-jet regionals flying recips and turboprops have a 3.4 pilot ratio, and the majors probably more like 14 or so now. And it really, so we take the airplanes in use and multiply them times the pilots, and it gives us an idea of how many pilots are needed in the future. Other things we look at, pilot utilization. So a lot of people perhaps know a pilot that works 8 or 10 days a month. That's what I was doing when I retired off the 767 as a captain flying international. And they may know a guy that's working 20 or 22 days a month. It varies widely. So when you actually look at the bid schedules for the airlines to see what pilots actually fly, they actually fly on average about 15 days a month. And that's significantly less than an average 9-to-5 job. A 9-to-5 job works 22 days a month. If you work 5 days a week, you work 22 days a month. So that's about an extra week off every month for the rest of your life. The bad news is it's not an 8-hour day. So a typical pilot also works a longer day, but it creates meaningful time off. So if you have 15 days off, you can do things like play a sport, raise a family, do what I did. You can run a business. So there's a lot of things you can do with that time off, and it's really up to you. Making a lot of people happy, not everybody, but a lot of people happy with the use of their time off. You work 85 hours a month, and many people would look at that and go, wow, if I worked 40 hours a week and I worked 22 days, I'd be working 88 hours a month. That's true. The trouble is the pilot's paid for the time that he's working by definition, and that's from the time the airplane moves under its own power till it stops back in the gate under its own power. So there's a lot of time that pilots are not paid for. This is actually on-duty time, the time you're in uniform at the airport, and that's about 170, 180 hours a month. And most people would certainly call that at work. I mean, if you're in uniform at the airport, you're not doing what you want to do, you're working for the airline. And the real rub is because a pilot overnights between his trips each day, you're gone from home 240 to 320 hours away from home per month. And most people call that work. From the time I leave my driveway in my car until I get back in my driveway, I'm at work. So you work a lot, and that's one of the reasons you'll see the hourly rates are so high, because you're in uniform at the airport 2 hours for every hour you get paid, and you're actually gone from home 3 or 4 hours for every hour you get paid. So you work hard and you make good money. The different utilization rates, smaller airplanes fly less. Notice the bottom of this chart. I hate charts that go to 0, but this one goes to 7. So 717s at this typical major airline work 11 hours a day, and A330s, the longest range airplane at that company, works an average of 17 hours a day. So you have to ratio the aircraft utilization times the pilots required for the airplane to get this forecast that we're talking about. So Major Airlines cumulative retirements, when you put them together, the American has the best from back in 2020, and we're not much past that. So certainly by the time you get to 50% in a two-man cockpit, no doubt you can be a captain. In reality, because not everybody wants to be a captain as soon as possible, they don't want to go to New York in the smallest airplane. They don't want to work weekends and holidays, so they hold back. The typical captain, people bid captain at about 8 to 10 years, a balance between income and time off. But you could be a captain at many of these airlines now in a couple of years, or you could wait and never be a captain. Some people choose to do that. And because of a premium pay situations where the airlines will pay you extra, 50% more, even 100% more, pay you double to take trips when on your days off or when other pilots are unavailable. So it is possible for a co-pilot who makes 66% of what the captain makes to get double pay in the co-pilot seat if he works it right and make more than the captain. So there are co-pilots out there that make more than average captains by working the system. And to do that, they have to be very senior, meaning they have to be with the company a long time and be typically pass up captain to be a very senior co-pilot and work the system. So this was another airlines forecast along. I mixed in estimates for regional airlines, corporate and fractional. And we need about 80,000 pilots in the next 20 years, an average of 4,000 a year, which the past average is more like 2,000 a year. So we're going to need a lot of pilots over the next 20 years. This is what happened at Delta. This is their seniority list. In blue, this was before the pandemic. And in red, this is after the early retirements. So this shows a big drop in the, still a 500 pilot a year loss due to retirements, but they sort of took the peak out. And that's why they did this early retirement. All the major airlines that had large early retirements, American and United, would look the same. They sort of took the top out of it, but still remains a good strong 300 to 500 pilots retiring every year for the next 20 years. Risk factors, we got to say it's a risky business, no doubt about it. The recession, it didn't happen that much in the U.S. It was sort of short, like most recessions are. Like support from the government helped cushion that, and we had a downturn for a year, maybe a year and a half, depending on how you count it. But that's pretty short compared to the overall recovery length of the virus. Labor always under pressure. You have to realize that labor management at the company's job is to save money, keep costs down. The pilots are a cost, so it's always a pressure to reduce pilot wage and benefits. The pilots are about 10% of the workforce, and they're about 30% of the wage. Depending on how costly fuel is, labor costs can be the highest cost in an airline. Fuel prices are going back up, so labor will lose that situation, but it sort of depends on how expensive the fuel is. Furlough and bankruptcy, I said we avoided 15,000 furloughs with the CARES Act. Thank you very much. The terrorism and war, always present. We're always talking about that, but it's not likely to be that we had what would probably be called an overreaction to 9/11. We basically parked our airlines for months and took a year or so to recover. Now we know that terrorism can happen. If it happens, we've been wonderfully fortunate for it not to happen, but if it happens, it won't be as big a reaction this time. Every time we go through the metal detector, get a scan, we realize that there's a risk of these things in our environment. So it's not going to be as big a shock. It'll be a shock, but not as big a shock as it has been in the past. Mergers, most of the big ones have occurred. The United and Continental, Delta and Northwest, American and US Air, America West, those big ones have occurred. There are still possibilities. In most cases, the companies are healthy on both sides. If that's true and they put a merger together, it should not have a huge effect on your career. Now, if your company's failing and you get put on the bottom of the list, that can have a big effect on your career. But normally they put the companies together, and I get a lot of questions. Well, what about that? Well, they're doing it because it's good business. They're doing it because it makes sense. If they're right, your career should be fine. Now, I know if you go out and talk to a pilot that's been through a merger, they're going to probably tell you it's not fine. And the problem is that they look at their seniority number. Let's say there were 10,000 pilots at this company and they were number 5,000. So they were 50%, but their number was 5,000. So let's say they merge with another company that has 10,000 pilots, and now there's 20,000 pilots, and their percentage number would now be 10,000, but they weren't 5,000. So they'll tell you they lost 5,000 numbers, but percentage-wise, they're still the same. So it's very difficult to evaluate from outside how successful a merger was. There are certainly pilots that lost some seniority in a merger and others that gained seniority. Typically, the surviving company, the company that is the acquiring company, does a little better than the one that's acquired, but not necessarily. Fuel prices, they're headed up, and like we said, no, they're have a big effect on profits, and that affects the airline's success, the ability to buy airplanes, expand routes, both of which require additional pilots. Flow agreements, these flow agreements and pathway agreements, they're everywhere. I mean, I don't know if you've been watching, but companies like American, 2/3 of their pilots come through these flow agreements. The majority, the other third, are military. There's a very small percentage that are not flow or military. So if you want to work at American, you probably need to be in one of these flow agreements. The other airlines all have them, but they have not been as pervasive, but they're growing in importance. So these flow agreements, if you're starting at zero, you need to look at where the flow agreement ends up. I'll say one thing about flow agreements, though. Normally, by the time at the end of the flow, you have enough experience and qualification to probably go anywhere. So you don't necessarily have to flow to the airline that you're targeted for. I think of it more as insurance. I have the insurance. I'm in a flow for American, I can go to American. But by the time I flow, I'm going to be qualified enough to go to any company, and I can make the choice that's best for me, and American becomes my backup company. New entrant carriers, surprisingly enough, there have been more upstarts in the COVID than there have been in failures. They're predicting about 20 failures worldwide this year. The upstarts, there's more upstarts than there are failures. It takes a lot of money to start an airline, and it's very, very risky. From a pilot's point of view, you get very excited. I'm going to be number one on the list. I'm going to get on that company, and life is going to be good. And of course, what the statistics are that only 5% of the companies that get started make it 5 years. So a very low percentage that you'll actually do that. The other percentage is that only half of the ones that put in the start, if you watch the paperwork at the government, only half of those start. So only half of them start, and only 5% of those make it 5 years. So upstarts are extremely risky. Might be a good place to build flight time, may not send the kids to college. Need to keep your eyes open going in. Pandemic, if it returns or lingers, which it's certainly doing, it's going to have a lasting effect until it's cured or managed to a point that it's like the flu, where we just deal with it on an annual basis. So talking a little bit about pay, we're looking at, everybody knows the paycheck. We look at the right side of this, the W-2 would be 63% of what the career's worth. When you put in the benefits and retirement, that's another third. So if a pilot was making 200, it's really worth 300. And that's why you can't go out and replace this career. You might find some other ones that have a similar W-2, but they don't have the excellent retirement and benefit values that our major airlines offer. So this is the average career values, running around a little over 10, approaching $11 million in today's dollars. This assumes that you're promoted through the ranks based on the number of airplanes that are available over a 30-year career. It assumes a 5% return on your retirement account. When I retired, my retirement return was 11.7. My wife retired a few years later, and she had been through some of the harder times. I think her return was 8.5. So you're probably going to get closer to 8 or 10%, but we used 5 as an estimate. This is a chart that shows the consumer price index in red, and in green, it shows the average pilot pay increases over time. So we are dramatically outperforming, and will continue to do so because there's a shortage. So pilots are doing a lot better than consumer price index. So when somebody says, oh, that money doesn't matter because it's going to be inflated, yeah, well, we're actually beating the inflation rate quite nicely. Oh, I didn't put the latest one in. I have a 2022 chart. The numbers are close, though. The pay didn't change that much. Bonuses have gone up a little bit. but not much. The average regional pay is about 58, 60,000 now. It's gone way up. The bonuses have gone way up. It's a much better environment. We'll say that the co-pilot probably still not what you would consider a living wage. You might take a little bit of a pay cut if you're a career changer coming from another career, but certainly the captain's position is a living wage. And when you add in the retirement, it's a pretty good job. So regional co-pilot, not so good. Regional captain is a pretty good job. Major co-pilot, major captain are good jobs. So 3 out of the 4 are good. You have to survive the regional environment to get the experience you need to move to the higher level. This is the major level. Again, 2020, it's gone up a little. You can see my pointer. Can you see my pointer, Eric? Do you know? So the largest, this is a monthly pay, because that's how you pay your bills. You get a monthly mortgage, monthly car payment, whatever. So monthly bills, we bring them down to average here for the majors. So we start out in the 73 or whatever, move up over 100 the second year. We're at 150 by the 4th or 5th year, and captains, junior captains at 11 years, 250, senior captains, 278. Cargo's a little higher. They have bigger planes. Bigger planes pay more money. The difference between a 737 and a 777 can be 30 or 40% in pay. So I've been talking a lot. Hopefully we've reached our allotted time here, and we are open for questions.
Well, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it. We do have some questions that came in while during your presentation, and I'm sure more will continue to trickle in here. So I'll kind of start off with a couple. First, there was one right off the bat as you were kind of going through a little bit of your background. Somebody had asked if your time in the Army, were you flying with a special operations unit?
No, at the time, I don't know that the Army had a fixed wing special operations unit. They may do today. I'm long gone from there. But I was drafted during Vietnam. I had gone to college, went to NC State, got an ROTC right away. Sort of very eager. Turns out I was in a 6-year program for architecture, and your last 2 years of ROTC have to coincide with your graduation. I did not know that. So when I went in my 3rd year to join ROTC, they said, no, sorry, you can't get in until your 5th year. And I said, there's a problem. I have a 4-year deferment, and the 5th year may not happen. And sure enough, the 5th year didn't happen. I got drafted, so I went into the Army flight program. Looked out there, was pretty much sure I was going to go to Vietnam. I had a colonel that told me to fly airplanes, which would help me be an airline pilot. I needed to make a certain selection, and that I would be laughed at, but I checked fixed wing. Fixed wing was only 10% of the corps. So they laughed, but I stuck with it and eventually got fixed wing, and consequently flew as an instructor. I did that for the wrong reason. There was a fuel shortage. People weren't flying much. And I went on and got an instructor rating so I could fly more during a fuel shortage. Turns out I really liked instructing. I found the machine was a machine, pretty much always did the same thing, but interfacing that machine with a pilot was always a unique situation. So I was much more fascinated with the teaching than I was with just the flying. So I went on, flew all the different airplanes in the Army as instructor, evaluator, and got out with that 4,400 hours, which was a lot for the time. And that helped me transition to the airlines. So I was pretty much an instructor the whole time, and never went anywhere or did anything but train pilots and a lot of different airplanes. And I was very happy with that.
Excellent. Well, there you go. Well, I mean, that's pretty interesting. So never on like a deployment, always as an instructor at a training base, huh?
Yeah, the only time I went to the field, I went to OCS to become an officer, and we went to the field at OCS. And the only time I was in the field was in OCS in active duty. The rest of the time I was an instructor, in good accommodations. I was on orders to Vietnam for a couple of years. They had trained too many, and eventually they said, you go to Vietnam, you're going to have to volunteer. We'll give you an aircraft transition, make it worth your while. And I looked at that and said, I'll go to war if I have to, but I'm not going to volunteer for war. That's against the rules from my point of view. So I didn't volunteer. I stayed back. And because of the fuel shortage and my instructor status, I was able to get a ton of flight time staying in the US. And I actually went to my hometown for the first assignment and to Alabama, lower Alabama, LA for the second assignment. So I was happy with that.
Okay, wow, that's excellent. There was kind of a current events question that had popped up. I don't know how familiar you necessarily are, but it's about the effects that everybody has been seeing in the news of this whole 5G rollout and how that may affect the recovery of airlines here. I don't know if you have any insights into that or not, but I'd be interested to hear.
Well, I have been looking at it. I get a fair number of media calls, and if I can't help them, I try to refer them to somebody who can help them. I do know a little bit about radar altimeters. You know, we use those every day, so I've talked a little bit about and did a little research on it. Right now, it looks like it's going to be a relatively short-term problem. Over half of the airplanes have been certified to safely fly with the current setup, with the reduction that they've made around the airports. They're in the process of testing the others. We got a couple of months now to test the others. We can turn down the volume, you know, reduce the transmitter power. We can shield it. We can put a new receiver in the airplane that's shielded. But there's solutions there. It may take a little time, but I don't think it'll have a big effect on the airlines. I don't know. I'm not a radar altimeter expert. It may be the case of the cell phone, you know, where for a decade they say don't use the cell phone, and then they come back and say, you know, it's okay to use the cell phone, and nothing's really changed. I will say that Europe, which does have a slightly different setup of transmitters, and they do have the same receivers, they have the same airplane, but they have a different transmitter setup. They are safely operating with 5G, and the odds are really good that we're going to be able to do that too in pretty short order. So I'm hoping it's much ado about nothing. I would be surprised if it became a significant restriction to the recovery.
Excellent. Okay. Very good. There was also an interesting question that I find is also sort of something you hear a little bit about now with the current hiring sort of craze, and that is a question about would you recommend skipping the regionals? So if you have the opportunity to get on, you know, some of the LCCs in the US have recently said that they're going to hire maybe directly from flight schools and this kind of thing. Is this something that you would recommend for somebody to do, or do you think you know, the standard course of go to a regional and build your experience and then transition onto you know, a major airline is a better way to go?
Well, there's a bunch in that question. I'd like to address several different angles. The first angle is, and when I build these career models, I look at the career values of the different companies, and I model, you know, Allegiant, Frontier, Spirit, JetBlue. I model those companies, and I've been doing it for years, you know, 25 years. And over the last 5 years, there's been a dramatic increase in their pay and benefits. So in the past, they were way down. You know, they were half of what the legacy major airlines would be, and they've come way up, not only in their hourly rates. When an example would be the latest rates. There's been a couple of new pay rates recently that were really quite high, so they're really doing well. And then the retirement values. So pilots don't normally look at that, but the retirement values were very low, you know, 4 or 5%, and they've all come up to like 15%. Well, the legacy majors are 16%, so they're more than 95% there. So the combination of the pay raises and the retirement improvements have made these calculations much closer together. So yes, I think those companies on a pay and benefits level are excellent. Now, if you're hell-bent on going to the legacy major, the question is it a good move to go to a low-cost carrier and then go to the major? Well, the coin of the realm, if you will, is turbine PIC time. Not jet, but turbine. So the problem with going to a low-cost carrier early, and some of them are hiring pilots at pretty low levels, is you're not going to be a captain right away, and you're not going to get the turbine PIC anytime soon. So that's a little bit of a negative. If you're shooting for FedEx and UPS, which have the highest, you know, turbine PIC preference, and a couple of other companies that mention it, most of them don't mention it, but they all prefer it. I mean, it is the best experience you can get. So I'm concerned if you go really early and wait 2 or 3 years to make captain, that you're delaying the time that you would get turbine PIC. So you have to. But if you look at the company as a career goal, if it's a company you would stay at, then you should go as soon as possible, because the sooner you get there, the sooner you build seniority at that low-cost carrier. I might also add that the low-cost carriers for the last 15 years have grown dramatically faster, bigger market share than the legacy carriers. The legacy carriers have grown through mergers and acquisitions. They have not grown overall like the regional carriers have. So the chance of making captain a lot sooner on average at a low-cost carrier than a legacy carrier, even though they're legacy captains in a year now. I mean, again, we're looking at I have to look at probabilities. So I have to look at when 50% of the pilots make captain, not when the most junior one that's willing to go to New York and fly the 717, he's willing to do it, but most people aren't willing to do that. So
I guess on that note as well, I would think of it as probability as well. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but one of the other elements to that, to me, is probability of being hired at 1,500 hours and eligible eligible for your ATP. I think probability of being hired is much lower at a place like one of the low-cost carriers than it might be at a regional airline, right? And so your time to get in, you may be delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed until you finally get the interview and you finally get a job offer, whereas you could have spent all that time maybe at a regional that would take you immediately.
yes, skipping the regionals, when I heard the question, I assumed you had a choice between low-cost carrier and regional. This is a gunfighter kind of business, so waiting doesn't work. You just get shot. Okay, so if you can get a regional job, but you can't get a low-cost job, you've got to take the regional job. You would not wait for a low-cost carrier. Now, if you can get the low-cost carrier over the regional, that's where you have to make that decision about, am I going to be happy to stay there, or do I want to stick with the regional? I'm just making captain. Do I want to stay there and get this turbine PIC time? And my general guidance is, my goal for you, if you're counseling you, which I do all day long, is I want you to have twice the minimums. So let's say they want 1,000 turbine PIC or 1,000 turbine, whatever. I want you to have twice that, because that's a minimum. And what we see when we look at statistics over the years is most people hired have about twice the minimums. So I'm really concerned that 1,000 hours is probably a year or more, and 2,000 is a couple of years. So you really need to be a captain for a couple of years to get this. And if you look at twice the minimums, now you probably get hired before that. This is going to be a very unusual year. A lot of things are going to change. People are dropping 4-year degrees. They're cutting off recency requirements. They're doing all kinds of things, and it's just getting started. So it's going to be a wild and crazy year. Basically, if you meet minimums, you should apply. There's no doubt about it. If you're close on the minimums to a regional, you should apply. If you meet minimums at a major, you should apply. And keep an eye on the minimums. This is a year where we might see them change.
Interesting. Yeah, so kind of along the same lines, then there's questions about the idea of doing a bachelor's program, right? Like an Embry-Riddle or a UND or these kinds of programs, as opposed to like an accelerated flight training program. What are your thoughts? What's the value of maybe that degree piece versus getting ratings and your hours sooner in comparison?
Well, it's we have to say that even though the degree requirement has been dropped at some companies, that it's still a preferred requirement. Everybody says it's preferred. Okay, so the statistics, and I've been watching those statistics for 25, 30 years now, have always been 90% 4-year degree, even at companies that didn't require it, 100% at companies that required it. And what opened the door was these flow-through agreements, because we had people get into the flow that didn't have a degree, and they still got hired. So that's opened the doors. And they found that these pilots make pretty good pilots. So now when the heat is on, we might be able to get rid of it. But you've got to know that it's preferred. And many of the jobs that you might get if you want to be, anything else at the airline and a pilot, the leadership positions and so forth are far more likely to go to degreed pilots. Having said that, you probably don't need an advanced degree. So my advice is always get the degree. And then when I'm asked about the advanced degree, I say, the time and money you spend to do that might be better spent getting more flight time and higher qualifications and ratings. So I'm not a big advocate for advanced degrees. Delta Airlines, for instance, spend a ton of money correlating the success of a 4-year degree and success at the airline. And they found a very high correlation. So when they look for a 4-year degree in 5 years or less, and they look for a good GPA, they're doing that, and they spent a lot of money to prove that that was a good idea. So they're not dropping that anytime soon. So I want you to get the degree if you can, whether you go to school and get a degree at the same time, or learn to fly and get a degree, or get a degree and learn to fly. It doesn't really matter. You sort of have to get to the same place eventually to be successful at the very top companies. Smaller companies and lesser companies are not going to be concerned about the degree. Getting in there earlier, I'd hate to see you not finish your degree, but because, and the people that we see that are hired without a degree, I might add, have some college. This is not somebody who never went to college. They may not be finished yet. We know the airlines think it's important. So my advice is, if you're not in school, not having a degree is one thing, but not working on your degree means you don't think it's important. And we know the airlines think it's important. So we believe you should be at least working on your degree. And the people that are hired, we find statistically, they have a lot of zeros after their flight time. They have what we call a significant flight experience. People that are hired without degrees have risen high in the aviation field and done a lot of flying. They're not hiring guys at minimums without a degree. So there might be more to that question. I don't know if I got it all. Is there more?
I think that captured it. It's kind of the double-edged sword, so to speak, with depending on where you're trying to get to and how you're going to get there. Certainly, it could be extremely valuable to you.
Let me add one thing, and that is that if you do take the flight time first route and you get an ATP, which you have to be an airline pilot, that is typically worth a year, year and a half, even 2 years of college, if you take that experience and qualification to a school that has flight training as part of the curriculum. So if you're going to UND or Embry-Riddle or Arizona State or whatever that has an aviation program, and you bring them an ATP, they're going to give you significant credit for it. So if you have some college and an ATP, you could be just classes away from a 4-year degree. You should seriously consider that, you know.
Certainly, and I guess there is sort of the speed concept, I guess, that would also come out of that, right? With the idea, if you went to sort of the standard, we'll say like brick and mortar concept of a 4-year degree at a place like UND or Embry-Riddle or ASU or something like this, versus if you did like what you just described, where you maybe do your flight training, you turn in all of these certificates and ratings for credit towards the same or an online version of that degree. There could be a difference in speed as far as how fast you're going to build your experience and your time.
Absolutely. The problem I see, and when I talk to people every day, all day long, the problem is self-discipline. So what you just mentioned, the very best way, get your basic flight ratings, go to college simultaneous, work as an instructor, build flight time. I mean, you can end up way ahead. The trouble is finishing the college while working. A lot of people, when you start working and you start making money, it's really hard to put it in the time for your studies. I mean, it was easy in the military for me. The military was a regimented environment. I could segment out the time and do my studies. But there are many, many people, and if you don't have the discipline for it, it's not a good solution. It's the fastest solution, but it only works if you have the discipline to make it work. In other words, you have to go to school and work at the same time. That is not for everybody.
Yeah, I agree with that. So there's a couple of questions from folks that are looking as like career changers. So kind of changing topics slightly here. So there's just more generically of, I'm in my mid 40s. Would I be able to make it to a major airline in the current situation? And then a more maybe precise example that might lean more on your sort of expertise and market analysis is an example case of somebody in their mid 30s currently, in a job as an engineer making $140,000+ a year. Is it worth it to invest in the education to go through flight training and then transition into the career?
I deal with a lot of career changers. It's a great question. I talked to this the last couple of days on people that had been out military pilot that got out and didn't become an airline pilot, became something else, and he's been out 10 years and he wants to know if he can come back. Other pilots that are saying, I've sold my business, or I have an inheritance, I now have the funds to do this. Is it a good investment? Well, first of all, being in a job you don't like is a life sentence. Okay, so I don't ever recommend that you stay an engineer if you don't like being an engineer. So money aside, and I know guys, one of our best friend's son, which we've been advising, just became a cargo pilot after working as an instructor for a year and a half or so. And every time I see him, he's got this big smile on his face, and he's flying, Beech 99s and Metros in and out of the Colorado mountains in a snowstorm. And he's got a big smile on his face. So, and he used to make really good money doing, computer graphics or design or whatever, but he always wanted to be a pilot. He seems to be pretty good at it, and he's really happy with it. And that's a money aside answer. If you enjoy this career, like I say, you'll never work a day in your life if you look forward to going to work. So, but money wise, if we look at money, benefits, retirement, that kind of thing, my stepson became a pilot at a major airline in 5 years. Okay, you probably could do it a little faster now, but not much. I mean, that's pretty quick. So he got out of college with a 4-year degree, had never flown an airplane, and he got there in 5 years. Today, 4.5 years. So there's going to be a reduction. If you're making good money, you're not going to make that kind of money as a flight instructor or probably as a regional pilot. You get closer as a regional pilot. So, and then you get to the majors. We saw the pay chart. You get even in 2 or 3 years, and then you're ahead the rest of your life. So it takes another 5 years to catch up, and then you're ahead, totally ahead. You're ahead on annual pay after 2 or 3 years at the major, and then after 8 years at the major, you're ahead overall. So it's a short-term cut for a long-term gain. It is also a livable retirement. That's 16%. If you're 30 years old, 35 years old, and work 30 years, that 15% compounded at 5% is going to yield you a $2.5, $3 million retirement. So you can't just look at your job. You have to look at the benefits and the retirement structure to really answer that question. But the odds are good because the average 401k in America is 3 or 4%, and the average major airline 401k is 15 or 16%. So you're making 2 or 3 times the money with 3 or 4 times the 401k, which yields a retirement you can actually retire on.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. I know we're running out of time here. Are you available for maybe one more question?
Oh, sure.
And then we'll
Absolutely.
we'll see. We have loads of questions that have come in. So I think what we'll end up doing after this last one is I can download all the questions that were asked, and anything that's maybe pertinent I can send over to you. Along with their contact details if you want to reach out to them. I know I will also ensure that the AeroGuard team here reaches out and provides some information to some of the other questions around training and this kind of thing.
We can take a few more if you want. We can go another 10 minutes, see if we can clean up some of the bigger ones.
Sure. Okay, so there was a question of when interviewing for an airline job, kind of specifically around this initial kind of ATP level, what kinds of experience would maybe be more valuable? So they had asked about, is it preferred to be more of like the CFI path versus, let's say, a banner towing or surveying kind of role? What would your input be as far as that experience getting up to ATP minimums?
Well, my stepson had that same angst. He got out of school, and he could stay at school and teach, which is a great path, or he could go fly banners in Myrtle Beach and get 300 hours a month if he didn't kill himself. And we said, we don't think that's the best course. You learn a lot as an instructor. So the airlines will tell you that they like hiring instructors because the old adage that you don't know it till you teach it is certainly true. So as an instructor, you've replayed the basics over and over and understand them well enough to explain it to somebody else. and that is very powerful. It's also powerful another way that most people don't think of. When you get hired, you're going to be a co-pilot. So you're supporting the captain. That captain, you've learned with your student that you can't say everything you want to say whenever you want to say it, because the student's very busy doing this maneuver for the very first time. So you learn to shut up and take notes and put information in as needed. That is exactly what a co-pilot needs to do. So not only do flight instructors get a great refresher on the basics, and we know you have good basics, but you've also gotten a CRM or cockpit resource management lesson, in that you can't just open your mouth and say whatever you want whenever you want to say it, because your student won't be learning, won't be able to use that information. So that is it's a great experience, and I have found that to be true in my life, and I believe the airlines have hit it right when they say they like to hire flight instructors for those reasons.
Excellent. Okay, so maybe last question. There's several of these, so I'll put them kind of together here around, I think it's based on your background specifically as to why they're asking it like this, but would you recommend going through the military to acquire your certificates and ratings and, your experience if your goal is to ultimately fly in the civilian world?
Yeah, let me add one thing to that last answer, and then we'll add that's a quick answer to the other one. So I'm often asked, that the instructor question like was just asked, and while you're doing that, you go to a school, and where you spend your money is important. So you can go buy this rating or license from a variety of schools in your area. So you should do that. You should go out, visit the school, interview students and instructors, look them up in the Better Business Bureau, do your due diligence. But when it comes down to it, what you want from the school is not only the training, but you often need a job when you get done. So let's talk about who gets that job. Not everybody gets that job. If you're not a good student, you might not get that job. If you show up late, if you don't do your homework, if you show up and cut off blue jeans and flip-flops, who are we going to pick when you graduate? The guy that shows up in dark slacks and a collared shirt, leaves the airplane clean and fueled, does his homework? And career changers, by the way, have a big advantage in this because they've been in the business world. They know business. They know what they should do as business. Young people, look at them and do what they do. Okay. Older people, do what you do in your current job when you're trying to learn in this job, because you can make a big difference in getting the job. You may get the job because of your professionalism even before you're qualified. So be the professional coming through this thing. Do your homework, get your, dress appropriately, show up on time, do the extra things. And the owner of that business or that chief flight instructor is going to go, wow, I can't wait till this guy graduates. I want to make him a flight instructor here. Whereas somebody else that does all those other things wrong, they might go, we're not sure this is going to work out because we can't hire everybody. We're going to hire the best. So be the best. Okay. On the military ratio of getting hired, I'm a military pilot. So military training is great training. And if you have no money, it's not a bad way to go because they will pay for everything. But if you have the money, and my own son had this choice, right? I could have had him be a military pilot. I was a military pilot, be a military pilot, right? His mother was a civilian pilot, be a civilian pilot. I can tell you from these career models that you will get there sooner. And by sooner, I mean have more seniority. So that military pilot that's been flying that wonderful F-35, great airplane, is going to be your co-pilot someday if you take a civilian route and do a good job of it. Now, you can't wander around aimlessly and take forever to do it. You've got to be dedicated. You've got to have a budget. You've got to make it happen. But if you do that, you will beat the military pilot to the job. And by the way, the military doesn't make nearly enough pilots right now, and they're not going to. There are a lot of drones taking over military missions. There's not enough military pilots. They're short, and they don't produce nearly the pilots the airlines need. So if you absorb this small number of military pilots, let's say we hire between January and March this year, what's available? Only 100% civilian jobs the rest of the year. This shortfall we're talking about is going to be made up exclusively of civilian pilots. Your job is to be the best civilian pilot possible.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Darby. I appreciate your time today. I think there's final pieces that are coming through are thanking you as well. So Thank you very much, and I will be sure to send you the list of all of the other questions that have come through in case you have you want to reach out to those folks individually. But yeah, thank you once again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Well, we're having some additional ones hopefully in the future. Maybe we'll do an Ask Me Anything and just do questions all day. That'd be great.
There you
Well,
go. We might
all right.
be able to do
Bye.
that. I'm sure that there is a lot of interest in some of the metrics that you had on the screen there as well. So I'm sure that people would be excited to ask you specific questions about some of your charts.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Bye-bye.